Is taxing the billionaires actually going to solve the problem? People are talking about taxing the billionaires as being the solution to the world's problems. But as I showed in the last video, there is something bigger going on here, is the effect of communism on the central banking system caused crypto to be the solution to that problem, as the Allied side had the Bretton Woods system after World War II, which limited the competitive devaluation of currency, while the communist bloc had its own self-sufficient system, which didn't suffer from the same problem of competition between nations. And so people in the West operating outside the banking system and being billionaires really became the political ideal, as everyone else got political correctness and massive tax bills in exchange for poor and unrepresentative government. But listening intensely, which is why Trump, for example, is giving all these tax breaks to billionaires, as they're seen as the wealth creators. So in other words, governments have been taking in all this information, but no answers have been coming out, and they've been having the ability then to take all the wealth. So China, on the other hand, has operated quite brutally, really, in terms of its own domestic environment, but it has produced these kind of results now where it's the biggest economy, it's the biggest people, it's just got the biggest everything. So it's almost like the new United States, while the West falls into chaos and social disorder. And this is one reason that millions of people are not being encouraged to find out about the world order in the West, and don't understand the banking system, taxation, interest rates. While crypto remains a mystery, while states invest in handcuffs, detention centers, and massive reprogramming programs run through places like Job Center Plus. So it's all going to pieces, basically, because they don't want to accept what is happening. And all these conspiracy theorists are appearing, like Alex Jones and people like that, trying to explain everything that's happening as if it's a conspiracy. It's not really a conspiracy. It's just kind of like the end of the European empires and the end of that whole kind of period of Western world domination, which has led to just kind of the people that were milking the system have now just found better ways of milking it, and people haven't found that kind of solution in terms of creating a new type of society without accepting the kind of socialist communist sort of influence, which is what the whole, well, basically because of the people that are still running the place are still people that have left over from the Cold War. So children are carrying knives to school, children as young as 9 or 10. So this is why the smart money wants to live in their own secluded compound away from the world's social problems, while people at large are divided over issues of right and left, new world order versus old world order, different communities, different religions, continuity versus change, the problem with terrorism and war on terror looming in the background, causing mental health issues, headaches, and unsolvable political problems. So surely this is madness, because we're not going to solve the problem using any method other than addressing the fundamental structure of the situation here. Taxing the billionaires might do one thing. It's going to create maybe a redistribution of wealth, but it's not actually going to create new ideas, and it's not going to seed the next kind of generations or the next kind of load of people that are coming through the education system into the workplace. It's not going to fuel them with any kind of new ideas. It's just going to create more of the same. So I get it now. The problem at the moment is the world has to work in this particular way because of the structure of the postmodern age, and we can see the way it caused the problem of terrorism. And so the people in the West can't see that while they're fighting the war on terror because of the implications. And it's like the Catholics didn't want to see the implications of the Protestant Reformation. The monarchy didn't want to accept the revolutionary point of view, because surely law and order depends on having them in charge of everything, and without that kind of oversight, people are supplanting their ability to manage the situation. So again, we're in a situation where it's all being done according to this kind of educated kind of viewpoint. And if you can't see what it is, well, basically it's because you're not educated, isn't it? And the thing is that if you can see it all, then it means you can become more functional as a person, but then you have to encounter the world's actual real problems. So then people they're divided again over whether we should let the educated people handle everything, who are then accused of corruption and being complicit in the illegal things governments are doing, or if everyone needs to know so then they can get involved, which is then accused of creating unnecessary panic and being too woke. So experience would suggest that we can only function better if we can effectively integrate knowledge, which is why I think the solution is everyone finding out about the world order in a general sense, and then applying that in their own specific field. So I don't think it's like we're fighting a losing battle, because we are actually winning here. The more we evolve, the more we do things, the more experience we get, and the more ideas get passed around. So it's always good to get out there and do something, as the UN is making sure of that, but it's also passing the cost. It's also passing the cost on to everyone else for things which are failing. When rich people have figured this one out and they've worked out how to pay no tax. So you've got to remember that the rich people are a long way ahead of the poor people. And really, we've got to get the poor people to get a basic idea of it, because otherwise we're going nowhere, because we have to keep dragging along this kind of section of society, which is like a huge uneducated masses, in which it's the cultural norm and it's the political norm not to be educated and not to know and just get told what to do. And if you can't kind of think for yourself, then how far are you going to go? So further developments in the rise of the new centre ground have occurred over the last year. The US has created a new body of nations who, by invite, have formed the Board of Peace, which is named in the UN Security Council Resolution 2803, and has been tasked with such things as overseeing the so-called peace in Gaza, appointing theoretically neutral people like Tony Blair. And so this would seem to be all about needing to do something about the sharp divide between BRICS and NATO. We can also see the need for the world to act in a community-minded way, to focus efforts in a realistic manner and discuss things in terms of real-time events. So the UN is kind of like a family again. So, it's kind of like Fast and Furious, $10 an hour. And this is why, through the political multipolar phase, people learn to reorganize themselves so as to address fundamental problems with the structure of global civilization. Now, the UN is moving things towards an end on the issues which have been causing them. So we can see the multipolar environment develop into a very sophisticated web of nations who are now actually discussing things which they couldn't before the problem of terrorism caused a sort of hard reset effect in the world system, and the kind of the divide between communism and capitalism to kind of just be like a kind of blanket kind of totalitarian thing. And the problem with terrorism has pointed out the fact that we do actually have a world system, as if people didn't realize that before. But what I'm saying really is that it's easier if people start soaking up this explanation which I'm giving people for how the kind of framework of global civilization is evolving. So previously, under the old kind of divide between right and left, people who needed to know knew everything, and the people who didn't need to know didn't know anything. But now it seems that the gap between them has become the problem because of the rise of the new centre ground. So if you can't get the educated view anywhere else, then you can get it from me. And to be honest, I don't know if there is another model like this, even in government, because of the way the UN seems to like to work with its own copy and then inform everyone else about what's happening. It does keep World War III from happening, but it also means that the world keeps producing more of the same world order problem as it had yesterday. That issue has been created by the postmodern age. The dynamics of the Anthropocene imply a different future is not only possible but necessary. And this is firstly because of the proportions in which change happens in general, which we can measure according to the way that ages change. Secondly, this new Board of Peace represents a step forward from the straight up divide between NATO and BRICS. Thirdly, this is creating the rise of a new centre ground with proposed reform to the UN Security Council, proposing countries like Brazil, Germany, India, Japan, and South Africa should have permanent seats, which is kind of permeating the kind of mass consciousness across all nations because of its implications on such a fundamental level. So this means that social change will cause change at the UN as it occurs. And just look at the direction of events. This is this is the model. This is the model of the structure of global civilization as it comes through and out of the postmodern age. And this is the Anthropocene. So in the meantime, much of the world's wealth and resources have fallen into the hands of a very few individuals who, it has transpired, appear to be able to best manage them under the circumstances, while problems with the world order issues at large, and people in general are unable to create a system of organising themselves which challenges the mainstream idea of society, which exists in different ways in different places, except now it's been modified to become tolerant of other cultures. So this is what would have been called in previous ages a war economy, designed to be managed by a few very wealthy people who can organise supply lines and save money, while democracy tends to produce excess. But now it seems to be a game whereby whoever can get themselves in with the establishment can win over their rivals by creating an economy of scale as they get to network and make the contacts who can support them more, and with loans, manoeuvring cleverly and a lot of hard work, can produce goods which are at low prices, which can outsell their rivals. This is a major reason I think a lot of people want to understand society, as they feel that they cannot get onto the ladder of being able to create wealth for themselves and are forced to work for someone else. Criticism of the system is that it only wants slaves or clones or whatever you want to call them, people who are kept poor and subservient to ensure a kind of involuntary loyalty. But is it really that, or is it the problem, this problem being just a byproduct of the system, and people are actually failing to discuss real issues because they're unable to talk in the same language and they're unable to connect? I mean, what is the divide between the bosses and the workers? It's not just the formality of that role, is it? We can see that some workers become bosses very easily because they have a natural way of talking about things, because they have an educated mind. So people that don't have this information, well, we know they're going to be workers for the rest of their life. But this can all change. The divide between capitalism, socialism, and conservatism, communism, we inherited from the Cold War, and it points to two completely different ways of doing things. So it's no real surprise that half the world's population have fallen down the gap in the middle. But even the most desperate person can escape from this trap, if you think about it, as being able to see the situation in real terms is the job half done. But we can't solve the problem if people won't look at it. So some are caught up in the problem to the extent where they can barely manage their own survival needs. And even worse, there are people who cannot and are doing all sorts of things to survive, like all the young people being drafted into the wars in Africa because of a lack of employment. So with the rise of the new centre ground the world is trying to create, we need the educated perspective to come into play on a massive scale. And it has to become a universal perspective everyone can hold, because having it held in such few places in such a concentrated manner, it means that certain people can twist it, and this is what we call political spin, which is coming out through politics, through politicians, through certain, and it takes a lot of countering and it takes a lot of effort to take the bias out. If one group wants to put across a very extreme kind of narrative. So then we may have differences in perspective, but at least we can discuss things other than just what our own points of view are. And this is what you might call a level playing field in politics and society. So then people will be able to take more actions on issues that actually matter, and making themselves useful instead of doing things which make the situation worse. So if you want to know how the world actually works, you can do it through my work, which obviously includes the book, which includes the whole of history. because that was my main kind of focus really at one point, and then I've just kind of got into following the world which has evolved out of that in this YouTube channel. So it's a case of learning to build on the firm foundation of how periods of human history evolve, because that's literally our connection with reality at this point in our evolution. As these periods go back into periods of life on Earth, that is periods of human history, go back in terms of understanding the way that we've arrived where we are, it creates an objective framework, because the life on Earth connects with the periods of the planet, so it connects with the geological timescale, and there's the hard rock of reality there in terms of how the universe created the planets and the stars. And so we have got various kind of architectural truths that we can take off that, and we can talk in terms of huge time scales, and we can, in this way, we can talk in a general sense about everything which is happening today, which is a level that we can't get to really through our own national history. If we're talking about in terms of things in terms of national history, then we're not able to kind of bring that level into it, because that's irrelevant to the debate which is occurring in very specific terms. So people may be talking about history in terms of their nation or religion, but actually we did not grow here like plants. We actually migrated and created everything that we have. So there is no objective reality for us other than finding out more scientifically about the universe around us and the world which we live in. And really our own history is only the subjective story really of how we got to be where we are personally. So we're all basically in subcategories of some sort today because of computers. So if we work our way towards understanding these, then we will be able to talk in a language that we can understand in terms of what each other are talking about. So otherwise we're just talking about and discussing our own perspectives. So it's quite simple after you get used to it, and I must say that it's a great switch to be able to make, because a lot of people are very much lost in their own opinions about things, and certainly lost in terms of political groups and other groups like religions, which they are really quite low down members of. And it's quite good to kind of be able to talk to more intelligent people. I'm certainly getting more experiences now of talking to more intelligent people about subjects which I never encountered. So I could say that I'm aware of the total size and scale of all the issues which kind of exist now in some way. And so if you think about it, your brain's got 18 billion neurons or something, so you can actually take all this on board in a general sense if you're using a framework which is interconnected, because it helps you to access different parts of that framework, and you can really kind of store ideas in terms of very simple, kind of sort of ideas, but focus then on your experience of them in a more specific sense. And I think that this is the whole problem with the university system, is it teaches people to think down a very narrow band of ideas, which they call a degree or segment of the total education system, and to work very specifically on a particular subject and discover new things. But we should all be getting a kind of general education. And I put the article on medium.com about how the frameworks of different timescales work for different periods and how they're all interconnected. And I put that also as the first article on the articles page on my website. And there's also free information on all periods, human, biological and geological, in Wikipedia, and just places like that where you can just get free information about anything. Since the last video, I split with Dynasty Press and republished Postmodernity and the Creation of the Anthropocene as Anthropocene Now. This is primarily because my agent there, David Hornsby, retired, and I no longer had any representation. After sending notice of my contract, then I thought about the title and the fact that it only seems to represent the issue of the current shift in the age from one to the next, and people want something which makes them feel like they're living in the present, like they're getting the latest. And so Anthropocene now is really about the new kind of type of now. When you're talking about the now, like as in a combination of past, present, and future, it's the new now that the Anthropocene is bringing is a more universal, global kind of now, kind of space that people can exist in. So it's about that. It's about how that was created over all the centuries, and how the periods in which the world has existed and people have changed and developed is all consistent with this idea of the Anthropocene, because that's what eventually occurs through globalization anyway, regardless of the directions which the shape of the world is going to create in terms of civilization and its people. So it's still got all the famous empires, religions, leaders, and philosophers who have emerged at the time to serve the needs of their society, and it's available in Kindle on Amazon at $3.99, which is the same price as the previous title, but there's also a paperback at $12.99 compared to the previous hardback edition, which was $24.99. So I hope you enjoy it and find the proof of the Anthropocene in there. As a summary of events in each period, it uses cross-reference sources to show how the events of one period led to the next, so people can understand how the whole of human history leads inevitably into the Anthropocene age, whatever happens. And in other words, we do get there technologically speaking, regardless of our impact on the environment, but the environment does become an important issue in this case because of the way that industrialization occurred, mainly along with problems caused by the shape of global civilization. So who's going to create the future? People with the issues, or the people who can see things objectively? Right now, we're putting the people who can do this in the roles of highly trained negotiators, as the future of our reality is really in their hands, especially when it comes to the Iran thing with the Strait of Hormuz and the issue of whether to have a war or not. The whole world could go into energy lockdown if this goes wrong. And some people might think that's great. That's great. That's the plan. You know, that's what they predicted. That's what it says in the Bible or whatever. And you know, so that's what we've got to do. So perhaps this is why they're installing all the far right so-called Christian nationalists into the American government right now to prepare for that. But anyway, we always make progress, and people at large will come forward to learn what's happening, even if it's just so they can get a promotion. And they will pass the latest ideas around amongst themselves without even realizing it, related to the world order through the debate in government, its departments, the media, and just general gossip, so we can all get updated about where we are. But for the uneducated, it can feel a bit like people who are simply watching other people's shadows on the wall of the cave in which they spent their lives, and having never seen the sun, it can be disorientating just thinking about it. But when they realize the freedom which they have, it means that they don't have to be alone anymore, and it means that they can enjoy living and learning in a world really where this kind of framework of ideas thing is you know, you can reach all the philosophers this way, you can reach all the periods of history, you can understand all the great empires and leaders, where all the wars were, and how social progress was made through religions. It's all in the framework. So this has got to be the thing that makes the Anthropocene go. And it might even be the difference between the world being ruled forever by an elite sort of upper class, while most people can only hold menial roles, serving those with the education and wealth to plan ahead. So it's like a bridge between the higher and lower levels of society, which has never existed before, which will enable all people to move up and achieve their full potential. This is social mobility on a scale people have never had before, and this is where the Anthropocene will bring its real possibilities in terms of being able to live as equal citizens on an everyday basis without the struggle of having to go through the revolution all over again. In the meantime, what can the super rich really do except invest in other people's labour in order to keep the economy moving, as it cannot collapse? They're not really at fault. There's no means by which we can solve this problem, which philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Voltaire, Spinoza and Ricardo, not just Karl Marx, have said that we have. The failure to solve has led to Napoleon, Hitler, the Ayatollah, Khomeini, Bin Laden, other people who've incited violence as the belief that it's the only way. All because most people do not have a voice of their own. And good people just stand by and do nothing as they do not know what to say, because it's considered normal that most people can be outsmarted by an evil genius with plans beyond their comprehension. But with this knowledge, you can have a plan and be ready and have something to say. So I realise right now the divide between the two sides is so great that most people would just rather do their job and sit at home with a beer and a pizza and sport on the Netflix. And but now we have to watch people dying in genocides on social media. It is changing the way people see the world, with activists like Greta Thunberg raising awareness and hundreds of brave volunteers being arrested and even killed for filming and reporting systematic abuse. People are seeing the reason why this Gaza issue is blown up so much, because people in the media have been killed, and it's kind of reached a kind of watershed mark already in terms of how issues are reported and what governments are doing, and certainly how the media feels about how governments are acting. So it is trouble. So act wisely. Don't just pick a fight you can win. Think about what you're doing if people are in harm's way or if things are consensual. As more people are becoming intelligent, they're becoming more unwilling to tolerate what governments have done in the past. But there are also new ways of living, so do not just persecute people because they seem to be doing things differently from how you think they should be done. The truth is now that many issues regarding fundamental human rights are being violated, and we must stand together on this rather than seek to create a utopia for a few people that we believe are going to sort our lives out with their wealth, because they've got no intention of doing that whatsoever. Their only aim is to make money, and that's how all rich people get rich. And if they help people out along the way, then so be it. And basically, if you believe in that, there is a very long queue ahead of you, and the average waiting time is lifetimes. So we must act, because it must happen in phases which create a tangible sense of progress. And then no amount of confusing tactics, currently being called gerrymandering by the media about the US government, and so-called counter-revolutionaries or counter-intelligence agents will be able to stop people working out how to take responsibility for the world we live in. Governments are now saying that everything must be done from the educated perspective. It's a catch-22 if people are not even allowed to know what the educated worldview actually is. Or if in a lot of cases they get a confusing and poor explanation of it. In the last video I was talking about fascism in the US, which is exploded in such a visible way, with ICE not only targeting illegal immigration, but just about every type of US citizen who's against fascism, stopping people because they look like the wrong sort of people, leaving cars with smashed windows in the streets, from which their victims were dragged into custody, even the ones with valid identity documents. This shows their badly trained outfit, as it improves their stats, even though it terrorizes society, as officers and their teams get more arrests, and that increases the amount of detentions or deportations, so they get promoted, and unfortunately their views then get heard on what makes a good team. So I'm thinking that just because World War II happened, because of what it represented, something like this must have eventually happened, as there is going to be some sort of question in the system as to why fascism existed in the first place. And of course it was to counter communism in the 1930s. Well, it emerged in the 1920s, but it did emerge to counter communism, and then obviously it blew up into the kind of fascism that we know from history in the 1930s, and it comes from the fasces, the bundle of sticks tied around an axe. It's an old symbol of the Italian magistrates, which symbolized the need for unity in defense of the system. But it just because violence can be used to defend the society, it doesn't mean that people should actually be looking for more ways of doing it. which is what fascism as a political ideology did. It believes that nations must go to war with each other to survive, so it's always looking for a way of doing that, and believes that everyone else is as well. So that's why the late 20th century oversaw its decline. But then, of course, since there is a continuation of communism, is it really neo-fascism now in the West, or were some of the original people involved in setting up the existing ideology as it is now? It never seems to have been properly discussed because of the Cold War. So going back to the German philosopher Hegel, what is real is rational, what is rational is real. If communism still exists, then this theoretically at least means that there must be beliefs operating on the other side which goes much further than personnel such as Nazi scientists recruited by the US in Operation Paperclip after World War II. It must extend deeply into the influence of corporations, which literally founded the Nazi Party and supplied it with vehicles, oil, raw materials, machinery, and loans when it came to power. Still, though, the right should be happy that people are standing up for what's right, because, I mean, that's what they're all about, isn't it? So, yeah, many people in the media have already pointed out it is not just a repeat of history, but there is certainly a progression of the ideas found in the original fascism. And one interview, a citizen from a US town said there were neo-Nazi rallies running around, numbering 400 in the streets in previous years, and now there's none because they're all working for ICE. It's also been said in the media that the Department of Homeland Security in the US has been actively recruiting people with far-right background, using nationalist themes and imagery that resonates with white nationalist ideologies, including references to foreign invaders and calls to defend the homeland. So some of this is not neo-fascism, it actually is fascism, as themes being reiterated from exactly the same way that emerged from European imperialism, which combined race with nation in ideologies such as Hitler's National Socialism, to counter the influence of communism, in which Karl Marx combined the issue of social class with the need to create social revolution in the form of the workers, because the middle classes would only produce their own version of capitalism. And much of it has been inflamed by the war on terror, meaning that people in the media and everyday life in the West have faced public scrutiny for ideas related to peaceful solutions for the world's problems. But then we all know how creative the French Revolution had to be. So, there is emergence of a new centre ground in world affairs. It seems perhaps the idea of governments is to now involve extremists from both sides of communism and fascism in society, in terms of getting them to perform these extreme roles instead of letting them develop extremist ideas in their own way. In other words, to control the narrative using their own methods and rebranding the logo. Most people who exist in the centre can thus be appalled, and governments who employ them can address their issues on an individual mentoring basis and creating teamwork sort of basis, breaking them down one at a time. It means the end of the need to be politically correct, perhaps when it comes to talking about issues, as society will be able to discuss things more openly, and this is another reason why the shift to the objective perspective is arising as the preferred alternative to the secrecy of the right and political correctness of the left, in which both the truth is either redacted or in some cases entirely omitted. It does not operate from its own agenda or amend it to suit what it thinks society wants. It speaks confidently and has already considered its argument in relation to the facts. If you like this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel for further updates.